Mini episode 419 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.info.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 419. This is FDH Lounge original dignitary Rick Morris, to be joined shortly by my fellow original dignitary Jason Jones, who is, in my opinion, in my biased opinion, the preeminent NFL draft analyst out there today. We did a segment last week where we were talking about the NFL draft. It is a tradition in the FDH Lounge. We've been doing this ever since our origins in 2007, covering it every year. But this year's draft, because there is much greater depth than in recent years, it demanded a second segment. And that was the estimation of Jason, who was also our senior editor and our point man for all things NFL draft. So I very readily concurred. If he thinks we needed another segment to get into the depth of it, then that's good enough for me. So we're back here today to talk about with it, to break down some things really beyond the first round, beyond all of the obvious kind of headlines that have been overanalyzed, quite frankly, in the last several weeks and months, thanks to ESPN, the NFL Network, and the rest of the sports entertainment complex in America. Enough of the surface opinions, enough of the sexy angles of this thing. We're going to get into the blood and guts today. And, of course, who's better at delving into that than my man, Jason Jones, my fellow FDH Lounge original dignitary. Jason, good to be back talking NFL draft with you again today, my man.
I'll tell you what, I was out cutting the grass trying to slide that in before we did this. And, of course, you know, nowadays you take your phone everywhere. And I had to dip right back in to episode 417 last night, from last night, out there cutting the grass, listening to you and Kyle get into a number of things. And I almost missed the call-in time because I'm only on minute 57 of 127. So very, very stoked to get into it.
Oh, excellent. And we caught on Facebook all of your stuff there and putting Kyle over. And, yeah, I know it's a mutual admiration society. I know that he enjoys all of your coverage and all of your takes on things as well. That's on you.
Rick, here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. In the beginning of that episode, for those that haven't taken the time, you really should, I think I hear my name like 7 times in the first 10 minutes, which is, you know, awesome. And, of course, I'm more than happy to listen to it. And then as we go along, we're going into the whole why he defends ESPN to the death. And even though I absolutely disagree with half what he's saying, Kyle's just got a way. It's just, I don't know. He has a way to slide the jabs in, to sort of go off topic and come right back again. It's just brilliant. And really, the guy should be heard by more people.
Yeah, he's a natural, and as I indicated in that, he's talking about putting up his own shingle in some way, shape, or form, and I'm working with him on that on a cooperative venture here in the 21st Century Media Alliance, and if I can come in and do some stuff for him the way that he's done some stuff for us, I would be very glad to do that. You're absolutely right. He is a unique and entertaining talent. Before we get to any of the blood and guts beyond the first round here, something that I wanted to run past you just as far as a later first-round thing. I know I noticed this from doing my own mock draft that people can find. Of course, your 3-round mock draft and my relatively puny, by comparison, 1-round mock draft in Pro Football Draftology 2014. You can find that at FantasyDraftHelp.com, the FDH Lounge, and other fine places in the 21st Century Media Alliance. The notion of a really prime safety dropping down the charts if nobody trades up. On my mock draft, I had Calvin Pryor going, quite frankly, way lower than he should have been, because in my mind, if you get past 15 or 16, you may slip to about 24, 25 before somebody prioritizes safety. That is unless somebody trades up. So before we get to any of the other stuff we're going to talk about today, address, please, the notion of either Calvin Pryor, HaHa Clinton Dix, or somebody else possibly being that guy that surprises us by going lower just because teams in those spots are not thinking safety?
Well, let me just say that, as you mentioned, the features in the draft guide, which are very thorough, but the dynamics are changing all over the place, and we're sort of in that area in the calendar every year where you're hearing all kinds of junk. And I'm as we speak, I'm redoing my one-round mock again, and I'll probably do it 5 more times before Thursday. And so much is trying to change, and so much is trying to stay the same. But here's the thing. Even as I'm doing it, I think you're going to see a safety go at either 9 or 10, Buffalo, Detroit, maybe St. Louis at 13, maybe Chicago, and then we're at 15. So I think one of them goes there, no matter what. And I really think that Baltimore is really in love with Pryor, who's probably not the guy that goes early. And that would put him at 17, which then would suggest that you're going to have to look at the number 3 guy on the board who's way down the list. However, let's keep in mind here, and I don't know how much you're listening to the chatter or how much you're letting outside influences affect what you're thinking, but I really do believe that if a quarterback does not go by 8, I think you'd be lucky to see one quarterback go before 26, which means all these quarterbacks that we were talking about, Bortles, Bridgewater, Carr, Manziel, whoever, you may only see 1 or 2 of them in the whole first round. And I really do think that that's how this is set up in many ways, not just for quarterback. You look at most of these teams, you've got teams in the middle of this first round that had marginal seasons but are good teams. I mean, hell, look at number 1 pick. The Houston Texans are not number 1 pick bad. They're probably not even number 10 pick bad. I think if everybody comes back healthy and they make a couple decent draft picks, that team's right back in the hunt. Now what they do from there is up to them. So I think to answer your question, I'll be really surprised if either of Clinton Dix or Pryor is left. However, I think the answer to the question you're looking for, and it depends on what team we're thinking about, in my humble opinion, right now, and it is, I reserve the right to change my mind, I really do believe that Deion Buchanan from Washington State is the best safety in the draft. I think he's essentially Cam Chancellor. And how many teams would not put a number 1 grade on Cam Chancellor if they could do it today? So I think the number 3 guy is worthy of going in the first round, even though I doubt he goes before the middle of the second. So if you're a team in the latter end of the first round that absolutely has to have an impact safety, as much as it defies what we believe in at FDH, you almost have to say damn the value and grab him because he's probably not going to be around when you come back again.
I would agree on that. How ironic is it a guy from Washington State, I realize it's not that close to Seattle, but more or less playing in the shadow of Quest Field that could be the next Cam Chancellor, and you are absolutely right. If you can get somebody who can do that, who can be one of the anchor players on a historically great defense, you have to do it. As we sort of now tiptoe in the direction of looking beyond the first round, one more thing I want to ask you about, because it's a question that just came up in the last day or so. Peter King reporting on rumors of the Browns trading up to 32 to get Seattle's pick and to do that. Here's what I want to ask you about, though, because I don't think we've really talked about this much in the past. The way that the NFL in the last couple of years, this is the 3rd year, 4th year, I think it's the 3rd year of doing the, or maybe it's 4, of Thursday night, Friday night, and then Saturday. You have a difference in psychology now. It didn't used to matter, Jason, if you were picking 32 or 33. You don't want to get snaked by the team in front of you. That's obvious. But you're on the clock right after that. Versus now, you have 20-some hours of hyper analysis and what's Team 33 going to do? And, there is a lot to be said, is there not, for moving up a couple spots to be 32 so you can get somebody before everybody starts angling, because it's almost like hitting a reset on the entire draft when you start day 2 and then subsequently again day 3, because it used to just be you go all the way through this thing and you have no time to pause, take a breath, whatever. When you're hitting the reset button, there is a big difference between picking 32nd and whatever the Browns would be, 35th or 36th, is there not?
Well, I agree with the idea. I love the rumor. I saw it yesterday. It made my day. And not so much that it's, sticking it to the Texans or the Jaguars or the Vikings or whoever. It's the idea that what that first round can look like. So, in theory, let's just say that all the assumptions are correct, and at most you're going to get 2 quarterbacks in the first round, and I'll say that it's somewhere between 3 and, of course, 26 because New Orleans, Carolina, New England, San Francisco, Denver, Seattle have no need for a quarterback, especially not early. So it'll be somewhere between 3 and 26. If that's the case and you're Cleveland and you're going to trade back in, not only is it going to be easy because you're basically saying, hey, Seattle, we'd like to have you move back 3 spots and we'll give you our second, third-round pick or our fourth-round pick or whatever, something that has value but not crazy value. In order to get those 3 picks, if Cleveland pulls that off, especially if they do it early, that means that they believe they don't need to draft a quarterback with the first 2 picks. And if you've been following the Cleveland Browns and everything that they're going through in the last 18 months, that should be huge. Because the whole idea was, they've got to go at 4. They have to go because, Bridgewater was going to be gone off the board. You better get a quarterback before nobody's left. And then as we've gone through the off-season stuff, now we're looking at it like, well, hell, Bortles will probably be gone, but everybody else might be in play. And then if you get to 26 and we're still looking that way, where 1 quarterback's gone, and let's say you're looking at Manziel, Carr, and Bridgewater, why would Cleveland pick a quarterback at 26 when they're going to be picking again, 8, 9 picks later, and none of those teams are picking quarterbacks? This is a game changer for their personal strategy and what you're talking about when every other team goes back to reset the board. Now all of a sudden teams like Minnesota are going to be, chewing on their fingernails because all of a sudden they thought that there was going to be 3 quarterbacks that they liked available in the top 8 of the second round, and now there's only 2. So it's huge. It's great. And I think all of it kind of comes together to this new strategy that we're seeing in the NFL draft. I remember years ago you had the first day and the second day. So it was like the second day was a reset, but you're talking about, 4th round or later. It wasn't a big deal. Now you're resetting the second round where you still are anticipating drafting starters. So it's a huge thing. I hope the rumor's true because I'm perfectly fine with it, especially if they're going to pick 2 players that are not quarterbacks at 4 and 26 and still get a quarterback they like. And I think there's a guy that you and I both love and are happy that everyone else is putting the cart before the horse, so to speak.
Right, and key to all of that is, again, if they only have 1 quarterback or that they like or 2 quarterbacks, whatever, and that might change the equation at 26 versus waiting and knowing that somebody else could trade up. But, yeah, all things being equal, they could wait. Also, I guess I misspoke there. As you pointed out, the NFL had for a number of years been Saturday, Sunday, so they had done a break at some point. But when you're going after the first round and after the second round, that's still markedly different from getting into the bowels of the draft, which is a little bit more what we're going to be talking about here today before you quit and move on to the next day's picks. The marquee position in this year's draft, such that, again, if it's not going to be quarterback, which it kind of always is by default, but we've been talking about this, and I even threw out the, hopefully not the jinx term, the class of 96 redux, because I think it could be that big at wide receiver. We talked about that in the previous mini-episode where we were breaking down the NFL draft, but there's certainly more to get into here today. When you're talking about this, and you've heard it out there as a counterpoint to Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, etc. Well, if you just wait, there's a bountiful crop out there you can pluck from them later, to which I say yes and no, because if you're Watkins and Evans, if you're the best of a historic crop, then, geez, how great are you? But beyond that, for teams that have that thought in mind, I want to go second round, third round, fourth round on wide receivers. Who are some of the guys that you see being difference makers at the next level?
Well, let me just mention on that idea, just so everyone's clear, because I think there's a misconception that, yes, Sammy Watkins and Mike Evans are great, but so is everybody else. We're not talking about A.J. Green and Des Bryant, being separated by 3 rounds. it's bad when you use Calvin Johnson, but let's just use Calvin Johnson. Sammy Watkins is the Calvin Johnson of this draft class. Now, the 10th best wide receiver is probably, Alshon Jeffrey maybe, or, name any middle-of-the-road, productive, fringe, 1,000-yard wide receiver type. They're going to be productive, but would you really turn down Calvin Johnson? And that's really what we're talking about. But getting past all that, looking at what happens after the first round, there's a number of guys. Just to be fair, let's just say, hypothetically, Watkins, Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Marquise Lee, Brandon Cooks are all off the board. For the longest time, everyone's pegged Carolina for taking Kelvin Benjamin. I'm just really not that excited about him. I think if you got Kelvin Benjamin in the second round, you'd actually have something to be really excited about because he's huge. He needs work on running routes. He needs to learn how to catch with his hands. He needs to be more consistent. He's not very fast. So, yes, he's a red zone threat, but I wouldn't pay a first-round pick for that. Then we jump right to my favorite guy, second round or later. And FDH contributor Ken Bex also loves this guy. He said to me earlier in this process that he would actually take this guy ahead of Sammy Watkins, which I almost threw up my stomach out of my mouth. But Allen Robinson from Penn State. Now, Penn State hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention this year just because, post-scandal, no one expected them to be any good. Then they survived that first year. Then the second year, they had some big wins, but weren't a big threat. But Allen Robinson is sick. Allen Robinson, in any other draft, is a middle-of-the-first-round kind of guy. He's got the size, the speed, the hands. There's nothing I don't like about that guy. Paul Richardson is this year's, Deshaun Jackson type. I'm not saying that's the player he is, but you look at him and go, he's smaller than I'd like, but he's so fast. He's explosive. He can take a little bubble screen or a hitch and turn it into something. So you got to like that. As far as guys I'm just really, really excited about that other people may not be or may not be familiar with, Dante Moncrief from Ole Miss, a guy that's not getting any attention right now, probably available late second, early to mid-third. Decent size, decent speed. He seems to catch everything. He's one of those guys when you watch him play, you go, yep, that guy looks like an NFL player. Just does. Devontae Adams is getting a lot of attention. I don't like him as much because for what he is, he's a little small. If he played the way he played at 6'3", 6'4", he'd be a first-rounder, period. Cody Latimer is jumping up the board. He was the guy I was hoping was going to be out there in the late second to third range just because he's got so much potential. You watch him play, you like everything he does except run routes. I mean, he can run routes. He'll get by. But he's not Marvin Harrison by any stretch of the imagination. Martavis Bryant from Clemson, as they say, the other Beatle at Clemson. He's actually really nice. If you look at him and you look at, say, Josh Gordon at Baylor, you start to see some similarities. They're long, lean, fast, good hands, and can take a deep ball, go get it, and then take it further. Is he Josh Gordon? I seriously doubt that, but who's to say that having a poor man's Josh Gordon on your team wouldn't be a bad idea? Jared Abbrederis is very nice if you're looking for more of a possession number 2 type guy. Jordan Matthews from Vanderbilt at 6'3", 220 isn't the fastest guy. He's not going to outrun anybody. He's not going to create separation, but that dude catches everything. So where he fits, I think he's a number 2 on a good team or a number 1 on a truly putrid team, but solid. And then there are even more names than that. Devin Street, who fell out of favor in Pitt, he's in this draft. Jeff Janis, Saginaw Valley State, D2 phenom. So, I mean, you can get guys clear into the third, maybe even fourth round that project as starters.
That is amazing, and it is the depth as well as what's at the top of the class that makes it historic. By the way, quick note of clarification, too, in case anybody wants to jump on you. I knew what you meant by this. I just want to clarify it. That Sammy Watkins is not Calvin Johnson physically. Mike Evans is a little closer to that. You're talking about impact. I just want to make that clear on that, in case anybody tries to distort what you said.
Well, here I got two thoughts on this, just because I've had to clarify this before. When I say he's Calvin Johnson, I mean compare the ranking of all of the wide receivers in the NFL, compare that to the ranking of all the wide receivers in this draft. They are both number one. If anyone wants to argue that Calvin Johnson is not on a tier by himself at the top of the league as the number one unquestioned best wide receiver, then we have problems, and I would love to have that debate. Whereas Sammy Watkins is also, in my opinion, the unquestioned number one best receiving option in this draft. That's really where the direct comparison stops. Now, I mentioned to somebody previously that Watkins is essentially a hybrid of Calvin Johnson and A.J. Green. Now, some people are probably spitting their coffee all over their computer or running their car off the road. But here's the deal. Sammy Watkins runs over people like Calvin Johnson, gets the ball at its highest peak like Calvin Johnson, can get the ball in traffic through double teams like Calvin Johnson, but has hips like Green, is fast like Green, is shifty like Green, and so on. So you take a little bit of what Calvin Johnson is. Yes, he has those characteristics, but in no way am I saying Calvin Johnson is 6'5", 230 pounds, and arguably the best wide receiver that God ever created, physically.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. As far as quarterback depth goes, we talked a little bit last week as far as the hipsters. If you see anybody in America who's rocking an ironic mustache these days, chances are they have a Jimmy Garoppolo Eastern Illinois jersey at home because he is their champion right about now. But when I look at the depth beyond the first round at quarterback, and of course, again, in this draft or any others, if you're talking about beyond the first round, it's all question mark guys that you hope have upside. But I'm looking in one geographic direction here, and it is south, because you look at guys like Taj Boyd at Clemson, who was projected to be a first-rounder before this season, Stephen Morris, who once upon a time I think a lot of folks were thinking could go early in the draft, and he's looking like a mid to later round guy. And you look in the SEC, Zach Mettenberger is a guy where, again, a little bit of the luster off of him, but there are still teams that are going to want to take a chance on that gun. Aaron Murray, only 6'1", even beyond the knee issues, I think that's probably something working against him, but everybody seems to love what he can do. And speaking of intangibles, everybody really loves A.J. McCarron. So those five guys I know to whatever degree are the focus of a lot of teams beyond the first round. But as far as thoughts on them or anybody else, what are you thinking about for guys who may have a future in this league, even if it's not necessarily at the star level?
Well, let's say that we've mentioned before today that it looks like somewhere between 2 and 3 quarterbacks are likely to go in the first round, which leaves what I believe to be anywhere between 1 to 3 others that are top of the second, potentially could have gone in the first type guys, and we really won't focus on them. And those are Johnny Manziel, Teddy Bridgewater, Blake Bortles, Derek Carr would be your top 4. I would add in that there's probably a tier in the middle of Jimmy Garoppolo or A.J. McCarron. But I want to talk about those two. And how fun it was yesterday to engage in this bashing of a radio station's decision to let a man on the air that thinks that Jimmy Garoppolo is the number 2 quarterback in this draft class. But that's another topic for another day. Here's the thing. Jimmy Garoppolo could end up being Tony Romo, let's say. The guy can throw it a mile. He looks like he can throw it into tight windows at a lower-level competition. He's got the heart for it. He's got the size for it. The question is, does he really translate? And we'll have to find out. But anybody putting him in the first round is crazy. A.J. McCarron is another one of these guys that I really do like personally. If my team drafted him, I'd be happy because I think he's a good guy. I think he's got a good grasp of the game. He's willing to be coached, and I think you can mold him a little bit. That said, naturally, I'd rather my team draft a quarterback in the top 2 or 3. But moving on, if you get out of that group there, now we're talking about what you're referencing in this sort of southeastern push. It really doesn't go any farther north than Virginia Tech for most of it. And that would be Taj Boyd, you mentioned, who I was never crazy about. Because if you go back and you watch all these highlights for Sammy Watkins, you realize Sammy Watkins made a lot of those plays. And if Taj Boyd is only 6'1", his glimmer diminishes a little bit, and I would drop him almost to the third round. Logan Thomas is extremely exciting because of his measurables. If he could go to one of these teams that has a quarterback like a Green Bay or a New England where you've got a guy that's been there forever, have no intention of moving him anytime soon, but you could let this guy learn and keep developing him, I think it would be a great idea. Aaron Murray, I didn't think I'd like so much, but I kind of do. He's one of these guys, if you look at like a Jacksonville, who may skip quarterback early to pick him up later, Aaron Murray's one of those guys that you think, yeah, that might work. Same thing with Tom Savage. I'm always leery of fast risers when we've been following this draft process since November, and then all of a sudden it gets to, May 1st, and everybody goes, oh, hey, Tom Savage is a first-round pick. No, slow down, back up, because what makes you think that we didn't think the entire time leading up till now? So I'm always worried about that. Stephen Morris is interesting. I think he's a project, but I think it's an interesting idea. David Fales is the guy who's catching some traction from San Jose State. He's fun, but he scares me a little bit. I think there's some inconsistency issues, and I don't know how a guy like that responds after, getting hit by fill in the blank. Once they get to the next level, it would be interesting to see. Jordan Lynch is another name that I find interesting, but I think he'll probably fall into the fourth round. This guy was a Heisman Trophy candidate, and everyone has since forgot about him. He had like 10,000 yards and 1 billion touchdowns last year. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think the big name to keep your focus on is the one you mentioned shortly and then sped on past, and that would be Zach Mettenberger. I think him and Aaron Murray go in the same sort of general area, but I think Mettenberger is a great candidate, like McCarron, like Murray, to go to, say, the Cardinals, where you've got a guy like Carson Palmer who, let's be honest, has had his time, and that time is wrapping up, and at some point they're going to have to pass the reins over to somebody else. And it would be really nice if that guy could be somebody you didn't have to pay too much for and had an opportunity to learn a little bit from Carson Palmer or a Peyton Manning or whoever. But a guy going to a team where he is going to start somewhere between some point in this upcoming season or the start of next season or the year after that. You don't want to stash him somewhere where he's going to be stuck behind, an RG3 or an Andrew Luck for the next 10 years.
Well, actually, along those lines, that's sort of like the thought process with something you're very familiar with, Brock Osweiler. Hell of a situation for him to be in, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's an ideal one, which is interesting because you watch Brock and, sometimes in practice you go, wow, he's actually getting it. He's the sponge to Peyton Manning. Oh, my goodness. And then they go out in a preseason game, it's fourth quarter of the third preseason game, and you really want to see something. He moves the sticks and then makes some boneheaded play. So absolutely that's the dynamic, is to have a guy sit back and learn from somebody who's probably better than he'll ever be, meaning mentor to rookie. For instance, if A.J. McCarron went to the Patriots, let's be honest, he's not going to beat Tom Brady, and even if he sits behind Tom Brady for 4 years. Not everybody can be Aaron Rodgers, but in this case, it would be nice to at least pass the ball off to somebody after they've had some time to learn.
I think that definitely is the case here. Looking at the running back position, something that I found very curious, this is a real sense of pessimism or realism or whatever you want to call it about the state of the running back game in the NFL these days. For whatever it's worth, the USA Today NFL Draft publication ranked this year's running back class as an A-. So talk about setting your sights low in the modern era if this is an A- class, because you're pretty much saying we are rarely, if ever, going to get an impact 3-down back coming into the league again, because you look at the best of the best guys here, I don't even know how many of them do. Carlos Hyde maybe projects as a 3-down back, maybe Trey Mason, but this is a draft full of, as I see it, guys who can be good complementary, maybe lead parts of a rotation. But to me, a real A-minus draft would be having at least a handful of guys that you see as real legitimate 3-down back candidates.
Right out of the gate, the most brilliant thing you just mentioned is the lead of a rotation. Bishop Sankey, Kadeem Carey, Andre Williams, there's a few others. They all feel like, yeah, they'll be 15 to 20 touch guys, but they may not be there on third down. They may not be there on third down when passing to get a first down. So I would agree with you that I think it's a little bit of a stretch to go that far, because anything A says that, first off, you're going to have first-round picks. Second, there's more than a handful of guys that you think are the next whoever, okay? Between Carlos Hyde, Sankey, Jeremy Hill, Trey Mason, C. Strunk, Kadeem Carey, Terrence West, Andre Williams, I think there's maybe 2 guys in there that are 3-down backs, and I think those are Carlos Hyde and Jeremy Hill. I think Trey Mason is a great example of a guy that's probably the lead of a rotation. He's going to get a lot of touches, but he may not be the only back they go to. He may not be the red zone guy. He may not be the blocking back. So I think that's absolutely a true statement. The question is, where are we wrong? For instance, I love Kadeem Carey from Arizona during the season. You watch the games, you say, that guy's everything you want. He looks like LaShawn McCoy. And then you see him run and you go, yeah, not so much LaShawn McCoy anymore. Runs a 4.7, and he doesn't do a whole lot at the bench press. You go, well, okay, I got to drop him down a little bit. He was more exciting on the field than not. But the situation there is there are a handful of guys that are going to get touches, who will be productive, who just may never be Adrian Peterson, which, is lofty to begin with.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, and we have to really set our sights, I think, a little bit more realistic. Before we get to the defensive side of the ball here, I know you wanted to talk tight ends as well, and that you feel that there's some guys beyond Eric Ebron who, again, he's one of these guys where his talent and his upside is just so tantalizing, and some of the next guys can kind of get a little bit lost in the shadows here. But I know that especially Austin Seferian-Jenkins, that's a guy that some people have pegged as a potential first-round pick. So even beyond the luminescence of Eric Ebron, I believe that you've indicated that there are some other talents beyond that who could really be excellent at the next level.
Yeah, one last thing on the running backs, though. I want to really, really hammer this. When talking draft and sports in general, a lot of times people say, you bang the table. And I am banging the table for Towson State's own Terrence West. If you've watched even highlights of this guy, he's ridiculous. He's got the size you want. His speed is decent. But he's a thumper. He's a guy that gets touches, and even though he's got some tread issues, you can give him the rock 100 times a game and he'd be fine. And I say 100 times a game, and I'm not joking. There were games in this last season where he carried the ball 50, 60 times in a game. He finished with 2,500 yards and 41 touchdowns. When I say finished, I don't mean his college career. I mean 2013, 2,541. The guy deserves a hell of a look, probably in the second round, but the competition will scare people off. So anyway,
yes,
jumping back into tight
by the way.
It is. I mean, essentially, that would be like if Johnny Manziel played in the Atlantic 10 and threw for 9,000 yards and 70 touchdowns in one season. You go, that's sick, but I got to really think about where it fits. Anywho, everybody across the board believes that Eric Ebron is the number one tight end without question, and I'm not going to dispute that. My issue is that Eric Ebron looks great catching the football. He looks like Vernon Davis physically and stylistically. My problem is he doesn't block, and he's not as fast as Vernon Davis. So while he is the number one, let's not just assume it's him and nobody else. Because to be fair, if Austin Seferian-Jenkins was healthy last season, it would be Eric Ebron somewhere in like 10 to 15 and Austin Seferian-Jenkins somewhere between 15 and 20. He's really that good, but he's coming off of an injury. So there's going to be some hesitation. But at 6'6", 260, running a 4.6, I'll take that every day of the week.
Yes.
And I had a feeling that Seattle might actually take a shot and draft him at that 32 spot. But as we mentioned previously in this show, let's just hope that they're going to give somebody else that pick. Then here's where it gets a little tricky for me. Most people, like everybody at NFL Network, for instance, loves Jason Morrow from Texas Tech. He's nice. He's 6'5", 265, made a lot of plays. He almost looks like a wide receiver playing tight end. Whereas Troy Nicholas from Notre Dame looks like a tight end. He looks like your typical Notre Dame tight end. I actually think I got Troy Nicholas just a shade above Amaro. That's just a hunch thing. I got no factual information to pass along that makes that the case. But I think that those are 6 of one, half dozen of another with those two. Now, the next big name, and this is where it gets a little scary for most, and this is why he's going to fall and fall hard. So we're talking 4th, 5th round probably, is Colt Lyerla from Oregon, who is, God, I can't even think of someone to compare him to, except to say, think Tony Gonzalez plus Dallas Clark divided by 2. If that makes any sense. So he's big enough. It's 6'4", 240. He is big enough to play tight end. He runs after the catch a little bit more like Tony Gonzalez, but pre-catch, as in the way he runs routes, how he gets off of his defender, he's a lot more like Dallas Clark. And body style-wise, he's a little bit closer to Dallas Clark. And what I like about it is he fights. He gets open. He's the tight end you want running the back of the end zone. He's the guy you want running the short little routes, because once he catches the ball, he's going to run over people and pass them and go around them, whatever it takes to get that first down. Is he Jimmy Graham? Hell no. Never will be. Doesn't have it in him. But the idea that a guy that probably should go 2nd round, 3rd round at the latest is probably going to fall to the 5th round is something you should consider. Now, he's going to fall for a reason, and that's because he's a bit of a badass. All kinds of off-the-field trouble. Drug stuff, violent stuff. I mean, if you're a GM, this is the conversation you're kind of fearing to have. You don't want to even consider a guy like this because of his past, but when you see him on the field, you kind of have to have the conversation. After that, though, that's where the bottom falls out. I think you've got Ebron in the 1st. I think you got Austin Seferian-Jenkins at the top of the 2nd. And then Troy Nicholas and Jason Morrow will sort of be jockeying for position late 2nd, early 3rd. Colt Lyerla is in the 5th. And to be honest with you, everybody else is an additional tight end for blocking purposes or a project that you hope becomes Julius Thomas one day.
Honestly, those guys are a dime a dozen, and every draft has characters like that once the bottom falls out at the position. I know from your draft notes here you had mentioned defensively linebacker and cornerback as positions of note. So in the approximately 5 minutes we have remaining, I guess I'll combine those here. Your thoughts on some of the top depth guys at both of those positions?
Well, as we mentioned in the last installment, I love Jeremiah Attachu from Georgia Tech. I don't think he's there yet. He's one of these guys that has time to develop. Taylor Hart is disruptive, but not exactly explosive. Marcus Smith is gaining a lot of traction. And then there was a guy at the Combine that's intriguing, but only as a project late, and that would be Cassius Marsh from UCLA. Now, those are straight-up defensive end pass rushers. As we look at linebackers, though, I think Anthony Barr is going to get picked way higher than people think he's going to, which brings us back to some of those names I mentioned. Marcus Smith, Kyle Van Noy, DeMarcus Lawrence, Kareem Martin are all guys that are defensive ends that could easily convert to outside linebacker. Love CJ from Alabama. I'm losing my stuff. Oh, D Ford is another one I like in there. And Christian Jones, who can play both inside and outside, but I think will play inside at the NFL level, is intriguing. Chris Borland is, in the last week or so, getting comparisons to Luke Kuechly, so watch out for that. I don't know how that fits because he's 5'11", 6 foot, 250, but he is a tackling machine. If you put him in the inside, he's one of those guys. I really don't think running backs are getting past the 4-yard line if they're coming through the middle. He's probably not as good as Kuechly, but to say that he plays like him is absolutely spot on. I still don't think he goes until the second round at the earliest. The sad thing is that an inside linebacker, I really think you've only got 3, maybe 4 guys, and then you should start looking at other positions. But the interesting thing that I wanted to get into today was C.J. Mosley, Chris Borland, Christian Jones, and the rising of Anthony Barr with the falling of D. Ford. Somebody's going to get a gem in D. Ford based on value, and that'll be impressive. But as we move to corner's weird, to be honest with you. Justin Gilbert, Darqueze Dennard, Kyle Fuller, Jason Verrett, and maybe Bradley Roby, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid, are potential first-round picks. After that, we're going to see a nice little sprinkling along the way. Some of the guys that I really like that just aren't getting any attention. Stanley Jean-Baptiste from Nebraska at 6'3", 218. You know, he's the guy that is popular because of Seattle's success. Didn't run a great 40, but he's a good cover guy, and he's huge. Philip Gaines, who's lightning fast at 6'1", 195 at 4.38, is a really nice corner before you find out he's fast. So that's an interesting one. Jalen Watkins, Florida. Bashad Breeland at Clemson. Pierre Desir, who actually has been doing some TV stuff lately, is very interesting. From Lindenwood College in Missouri. 6'1", 200, runs a 4.5, but real competitive. He's one of these guys you look at and you say he's not going to wow you at the combine, but when you put the tape on, he's solid. And if he can fall to, say, the third round, you should jump on him in a heartbeat. And then you've got some guys that are going to fall that you probably didn't think were going to fall, like Marcus Robinson from Florida, Dante Johnson, NC State, LaMarcus Joyner, Florida State, who technically I guess can play safety if you want him to. And he's been unpopular enough that I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name, so we'll just call him Purifoy from Florida. I think it's Luches or something.
That's
Purifoy
a tough
from
one,
Florida.
Yeah.
He was supposed to, 6 months ago, you know, when the NFL Network first started getting going and we're starting to get ready for anticipation of bowl season, and you're looking at Florida, you think, wow, that guy's really good. He's a Florida corner, so he's going to be good. He's not phenomenal, and he didn't test out very well. Ran a 4.5 at 5'8", really isn't going to help you. So he's going to fall a little bit. E.J. Gaines from Missouri, Chris Davis from Auburn. I believe that's the kid that ran the kickoff back. And Aaron Colvin is a name that I really do like as a competing corner, but not a cover corner. Great for nickel, great on special teams, third down, whatever. I think he's solid. I just don't think he's going to lock down anybody. So my point with the corners is I just rattled off 10 to 13 names, and I think that's spreading them out all the way through the fifth round. There's enough talent at corner, safety, linebacker, defensive line, offensive line, wide receiver that you're going to start to see guys like these corners, like these inside linebackers that are going to fall, not because they're not good, but because other places are better. And some teams are just going to benefit from it.
And I know people benefited from hearing our draft coverage again here today. Great depth coverage, as you promised, Jason Jones. And again, we'll be on top of this after the draft, and I believe joined, as is customary, by fellow draft analyst Chris Galloway here in the FDH Lounge. But always a pleasure breaking it down ahead of time with you, my man. Peerless coverage from you. Props for that. Thanks for the great analysis today.
Oh, great.
Thank you all for tuning in, everybody, to FDH Lounge, mini-episode number 419.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the periodic table of elements.